time rewind mechanics in Fire Emblem ruined the game. They just make level design so much worse. With the rewind mechanic just being confirmed in Engage, I wanted to ask the question, does the turn back time mechanic really harm the level design in Fire Emblem? I'm not going to talk too much about how good it is as a mechanic overall and how much it affects moment to moment gameplay, but I will have to mention some things in Shadows of Valentia. This video's main focus will be how it might impact level design. A common complaint I see from people is that it encourages the developer to put in ambush spawns. The list of the Fire Emblem games that do have ambush spawns are Fire Emblem 1, 3, 5, 6 and 7, which always have them, and they're partial in 4, 7 and 9, and then in 11, 12 and 13, ambush spawns appear on higher difficulties. So as we can see, ambush spawns were a big thing before Turnwheel came into play. They weren't maybe as prevalent and toxic as Three Houses, but they were still there. Fates has some in Birthrights and Revelation, and then in Shadows of Valentia, FE15, there are none bar the ambushes from enemies on the map and in dungeons. And of course there are ambush spawns in Three Houses. With that out of the way, I'm mainly going to be talking about the games which do have the turn back time mechanic, being Shadows of Valentia and Three Houses. In Echoes, due to the fact that it's a remake, the levels aren't actually designed around Miller's Turnwheel being there. So realistically, it's not that good an example of how turn back time mechanics can influence the game's level design. Some of the levels are of course tedious, yes, like the Fort Desert map and some of Celica's swamp maps, but in almost all of the levels, what the enemy is going to do and how you need to beat the level is quite evident from the start. The real use of the turn wheel, in my opinion, is 1, as a test of the mechanic to see if it will help newer players and be something that can be repeated in future games, and 2, for the dungeons. Going through many battles in a row without saves is very dangerous, and having the option to have limited time rewinds throughout the whole dungeon is super interesting, and I personally really liked how it works and think it perfectly fits the dungeon gameplay. It feels like a resource in that scenario and helps avoid a 98% mischance or 5% enemy crit that would make you want to restart the whole dungeon to save an ally. Now this is the main section of the video, Three Houses. The main issue for me in Three Houses level design is not due to the Divine Pulse mechanic, but actually the reclass system. Now this isn't inherently bad at all, but it will always just cause the level design to be a bit worse. The developer never knows how to create a level in such a way that will be perfect for the player if they never know what the player will have. For example, in any classic puzzle game, each individual level will exist within itself, and there is often only one way to act and complete that level. The developer only needs to think about the sole victory outcome and how to guide the player towards it whilst also making it challenging at the same time. However, in Three Houses, they could have 12 Gremories or 12 Wyvern Lords, and the player would have to be able to play the level in a completely different way and complete it differently. So it would be impossible for the designer to design the level around all of these options that the player could have. Now I don't think that this reclass system is inherently bad due to the fact that it all lends towards one of the main focuses of Three Houses, which is freedom. You are free to choose one of the Three Houses, you are free to choose which students from which house you take, bar a few exceptions of course. You are free to choose what class every unit is, what skills they have, and how you'll play the game in each level. You're even free to choose how you plan out each month and which action you'll take each week. You can train your students in different skills in any way you like, and have them use a multitude of weapons in each of the different classes. So to make the game levels work around that, you don't really have many options. So even though it might seem like the Divine Pulses are the reason for the random ambushes, those random ambushes are also there to create a guaranteed difficulty level in a scenario where the player has so much freedom to manipulate the rest of the level. So having those there causes there to be difficulty where it might be hard to design the map around that it being difficult. It's also very important to note that on the design team for Three Houses, there were only 17 IS employees, and they were mainly working in advisory roles, supervising the development of the game. The rest of the team was Koei Tecmo. This meant we didn't actually have traditional IS level designs. That being said, all of the levels weren't actually too bad. I enjoyed a lot of the levels in Three Houses, and when you had that freedom, the levels needed to feel reasonably free to act in too. But when they did have more restrictions, the levels matched that. Look at the first mock battle. It's a simple level where you have limited options. It needs to show the player how the mechanics work and ways of playing Fire Emblem. It makes it obvious that Brush is a good place to move in for defense. Then it shows you that you can take on separate groups of enemies by splitting them up and taking them on individually. You can fight Claude or Dimitri's army first. Lorenz also shows us that diving in headfirst without using terrain and the whole map will often end in disaster. This, in my opinion, is a really good early level. I also thought it important to note that I think the Cindered Shadows DLC with the Ashen Wolves has extremely good level design. I'd love to make a video talking about that in depth because I think there's loads to go into and I really love a lot of the levels in there, and I think it's all down to the fact that there is no class changing and the levels feel more like puzzles. So the design in Three Houses is actually really good there. On hard, I found the levels challenging but fair, and Divine Pulse worked really nicely in how you played through the levels. There were some ambush spawns, but Divine Pulse worked fine with it and it felt like it wasn't unfair to the player. So I don't think Three Houses is just bad level design in general, it was just difficult to make levels for a very free game. And in Engage, it seems like there will likely be a lot more class restriction. Mind you, there is of course some class changing that we've seen, but it appears to only be one class tree change per unit. So hopefully the level design should be more similar to previous Fire Emblem titles than Three Houses, and people will enjoy them more and have less complaints about them. I do believe that the developers may possibly be more careless when it comes to designing levels around Time Rewind, but I think Miller's Turn Wheel was reasonably well received. It was just that the supposed bad level design of Three Houses was what really kicked off the negativity for it. Three Houses did of course have a lot of levels that weren't really puzzles and were way too messy, but I do put a lot of that down to the freedom aspect of the game and the fact that it was an IS making all the levels. Now there is of course potential for the new Dragon Time Crystal and Engage to have a negative influence on the level design, but I think it's presumptuous to say that it is definitely going to harm the levels. Whether turn back time is a good addition to Fire Emblem or not is a different matter, but it does definitely help bring in new players and makes difficult levels less tedious. However, it can cheapen the experience of playing classic mode and ruin part of the aspects of Fire Emblem that are important. Though, I'll leave all of that for another day. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day, thanks for watching, and let me know if you like these kind of videos because I'd love to do some more analysis on Fire Emblem and more in depth than this. This was just kind of a quick one because of the discussions happening about time rewind mechanics recently. See ya!